Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now you've probably read the title and thought that just like the 3060 Ti video I made previously, this one is going to be a bit of a disaster. Now if you didn't see that one, what happened was, well, I purchased a Founders Edition 3060 Ti from eBay. It was the cheapest on the site because the rest were going for over £400 and mine ended up costing about £385 with postage. Little did I know until about 5 seconds after publishing that video, well, Nvidia restocked their 3060 Ti's for the first time in about a year, along with the 3070, the 3070 Ti, and I believe the 3080. Anyway, fast forward a few days and I decided to try again and purchase the cheapest 3070 on eBay, this time making sure that I was saving money. The 3070 here in the UK, the Founders Edition, costs £469 from the Nvidia website, and the Palit Gaming Pro version I have here cost me just £357. So this 3070 was listed at £380, which was already cheap. It was listed as an X mining card. The previous owner said in the description that it was used for mining and kept cool with the fans running at low speeds. Fair enough, I decided to take the chance, but it is up to you whether or not you want to do the same on an X mining GPU. eBay, at the same time as this thing was listed, were also running a sort of offer, a campaign, whatever you want to call it, but they were offering 10% off any purchases until the end of June. After purchasing this 3070 for $380, then taking off the 10%, this brought the cost of the card to $342. Add to that the next day express postage, and this brought the total of the card up to £357, which is more than £100 cheaper than a Founders Edition 3070, and over £150–200 cheaper than this exact model is listed for on a lot of sites here in the UK at the moment. So I think I did pretty well, but remember this is an X mining card, and of course it wasn't without its problems. Now the seller was fantastic. I asked for the card to be delivered to the local supermarket. It arrived next day or the day after that because the post office held it for whatever reason. They do things like that sometimes. But the card arrived, it was in great condition. The drivers installed, no artifacts, anything like that. And it was also in pretty clean condition as well. What I did notice, however, when jumping into any game was that the card got very warm very quickly, and this meant the fans shot up to almost 100% fan speed. It was probably one of the loudest GPU fan experiences I've ever had. Take a listen. This, along with the temperature soaring up towards 80 degrees within the first 5 seconds of gameplay, well, it didn't seem right, and my first thought was thermal paste. Sure enough, when I took the huge shroud off of what turned out to be a pretty small PCB, the thermal paste was completely dried up. It also looks as though the thermal pads are missing surrounding the GPU here, but these were actually stuck to the cooler, so I didn't replace these at the moment, but that's something I'll probably do. After replacing the paste and putting the card back together, everything was fine. And jumping back into the same scenario, Cyberpunk at 4K, well, the card didn't get much past 70 degrees, if at all, and the fans, well, they stayed a lot quieter. I would always suggest with second-hand cards to replace the thermal paste and perhaps the thermal pads as well, depending on the condition, and to give the cards a clean up either with an electric duster or a microfiber cloth, something like that. Just be careful if you're taking it apart. With that replaced and the card ready to go then, well, it was time to jump into a few games to make sure there were no further issues. Okay, so I don't have many benchmarks for you today, but the point here was more to see whether or not the card would just die or fail or something happened. I wanted to check the stability really and make sure it held up. I've been running it at this point in time for a few days now with no signs of any other problems. The specs of this card don't differ from a reference model. We do of course get the beefier cooler, but there is a Gaming Pro OC edition, I believe, with a higher boost clock This one though shares the same specs as the Founders card, which in itself is still very solid for 1440p gaming. Our first game today is Battlefield 5 at 1440p with the Ultra preset. This is of course a little bit older now, but personally I prefer to play this one over 2042, and it certainly runs a lot better as well, though if you want me to add 2042 back into the benchmarks, let me know and I can make that happen. Battlefield 5 is running with over 130 FPS with the highest in-game settings, though any ray tracing options were off. Motion blur was also off as a personal preference. The 1.1% lows were also solid, though I did find that DX11 mode did mean that the game ran smoother. I saw a few more dips and drops in terms of a 0.1% low with DX12 enabled, which I didn't expect with this card. In Cyberpunk 2077, 1440p once again, as with throughout, the high preset with the high textures and the high crowd density option enabled as well. Sorry, when I don't read off of a script, I just forget how to speak sometimes. 69 FPS, nice, with a 1% low of 54 and a 0.1% low of 47 here, meant a respectable gameplay experience. We can also use DLSS or FSR here as well and run the game at 4K, though with any of those two options enabled it won't be a native 4K, but it will still look very sharp, very crisp and run very well as well, as though we were running at a lower resolution. But personally I prefer the native 1440p option myself in Cyberpunk. Now I wouldn't really recommend the Extreme preset in Forza Horizon 5. I tend to stick with Ultra because I find it difficult to tell the differences in terms of visual quality, but even with the highest in-game settings with MSRP 2X enabled, we were seeing 88 frames per second on average with a 1% low of 69 and a 0.1% low of 64. It just goes to show how well optimized this is. It's nice to see this one running well, as always, with the 3070 at 2560 by 1440. GTA San Andreas Definitive Edition ran with over 130 FPS at 1440p with the high preset, which is basically the highest preset that the in-game menu offers. I didn't touch any other setting. We didn't have DLSS enabled here, though once again you can switch to 4K or just enable DLSS at 1440p if you wanted to, though there isn't really much of a point because we're running with a very solid average frame rate anyway. The 0.1% low, well, it could be improved, but this is GTA San Andreas, the Definitive Edition, so there are a few dips and drops regardless. But the 3070, what is it, 2 years after launch almost, is still a very solid card for gaming. And now that it's back in stock and there are some good used bargains to be had, it's certainly worth considering, even though we might see the 40 series cards coming out soon. But it's up to you. Finally then, it's Red Dead Redemption 2, 1440p once again with the Xbox One X equivalent settings. I just find it easier to choose these settings, and it combines a nice balance between visual quality and performance fidelity. So here 104 FPS even in and around Saint Denis, one of the most demanding areas in the game. The 1.1% lows were also pretty good, with 84 and 65 being reported respectively. Overall, 3070 is still a solid card, and over the past few days that I've tested this Palit second-hand version, this X-Mining GPU, it has held up. But it is always up to you, of course, whether or not you want to take the risk with an X-Mining card. You might be able to find them a bit cheaper, especially if certain selling sites have promotional days where you can get an extra few % off. That's it, that's not my decision to make. I just like to buy these things and report what I find in the hopes that it will help some of you out. But there we go. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.